My boss fired me for taking my mom off life support, so I took the company down with me. I spent 3 days at her bedside making the hardest decision of my life, and he called it abandoning my responsibilities.
He thought he could replace me in a week.
He was very, very wrong. Subreddit r/pro-revenge. I never thought I'd be the person to burn down a company, but here we are. This happened about 8 months ago, and the fallout is still ongoing. I'm creating a throwaway for obvious reasons, but I need to get this story out because it's eating me alive in the best possible way.
Background.
I worked for a mid-sized tech consulting firm called Integrated Solutions Group, ISG, for almost 6 years. When I started, it was a scrappy 30-person operation with big dreams. By the time this story takes place, we'd grown to about 200 employees across 4 offices. I was the senior director of operations, which basically meant I kept the entire back end of the company running while everyone else got to play with the fun client-facing stuff. My boss, who I'll call Derek, was the VP of operations and my direct supervisor. Derek was one of those guys who peaked in his college fraternity and never quite moved on. He managed up beautifully, the C-suite loved him, but managed down like a tyrant. He took credit for his team's work, threw us under the bus when things went wrong, and had the emotional intelligence of a brick. But I was good at my job. Really good. I'd built most of our operational systems from scratch. I knew every process, every vendor relationship, every skeleton in every closet. Derek knew he needed me, even if he'd never admit it. The setup. My mom had been sick for about 2 years with heart disease. It was one of those slow declines where you keep thinking she'll stabilize, and then something else goes wrong. In early March, she had a massive heart attack. The doctors managed to restart her heart, but she'd been without oxygen for too long. She was on life support, and after 72 hours of tests, 3 different neurologists told us the same thing. There was no brain activity. She was gone. My mom had been crystal clear about her wishes. She'd watched her own mother linger in a hospital bed for months, and she'd made me promise I'd never let that happen to her. So there I was, 34 years old, sitting in a hospital room making the decision to remove my mom's life support. I called Derek on day 1. I was crying, probably not making much sense, but I explained what happened and that I needed a few days. He said, "Yeah, sure, do what you need to do," in that tone people use when they're not really listening. I sent a message to my team leads, handed off my urgent tasks, and set up my out of office. The firing. I was at the hospital for 3 days. 3 days of sitting with my mom, holding her hand, talking to her even though she couldn't hear me. 3 days of signing papers and making arrangements, and having the worst conversations of my life with my dad and siblings. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, about 2 hours before they were scheduled to remove the breathing tube, my phone rang. It was Derek. "Where are you?" he asked. No preamble. No, how are you holding up? "I'm at the hospital. With my mom. Like I told you. It's been 3 days. We need you back in the office." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Derek, I told you what's happening. We're removing her life support today." "Look, I'm sorry about your situation, but this is getting ridiculous. Johnson needs the Q1 vendor reports, the compliance audit starts Monday, and nobody can find the files for the Westbrook project. Your personal issues can't hold up the entire company." Personal issues. He called my mom dying my personal issues. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'll be back Monday. I just need to get through today and make arrangements for the funeral." "That's not going to work. I need you tomorrow, Friday at the latest. If you can't prioritize your job, maybe you're not the right fit for this role anymore." Something in me snapped. Not explosively, it was quieter than that. Like a cable that's been under tension finally giving way. "I'll see what I can do," I said, and hung up. I didn't go in Friday. I held my mom's hand as they removed the breathing tube, and I watched her take her last breaths. I sat with my dad at the funeral home. I called relatives and tried to answer the same questions over and over. "How are you holding up? What can I do? Is there anything you need?" On Friday afternoon, I got an email from Derek, CCing HR. "Due to job abandonment and failure to return to work despite multiple requests, your employment with ISG is terminated effective immediately. Please return all company property to the office by Monday at 9 a.m. Job abandonment. I'd worked there for 6 years. I'd worked weekends, holidays, late nights. I'd postponed my own wedding because we were short-staffed during a major project. And this is what it came down to. The decision. Here's the thing about being the senior director of operations. You know everything. You know where the bodies are buried because you're usually the one doing the burying. And ISG had a lot of bodies. While I was sitting at my dad's house that weekend, drinking his whiskey and going through old photos of my mom, something occurred to me. Derek had made a huge mistake. He'd fired me without a severance package, without a non-compete, without anything. He was so eager to flex his authority that he'd cut me loose with no strings attached. And I was angry. Not just sad angry, but righteously, clarity-givingly furious. My mom had raised me to be a good person, to work hard, to do the right thing. And I'd watched Derek and the other executives cut corners and bend rules for years, telling myself it wasn't my problem, that I should just focus on doing my job well. But they'd made it my problem. So I decided to do the right thing, just not the thing they wanted. The investigation. I spent that weekend going through every file I had access to. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wasn't that illegal? Here's the thing. They hadn't deactivated my accounts yet. My emails still worked. My access to our shared drives still worked. Our document management system, our project management software, our financial systems, all still active. Their IT department was small, and the guy who handled deactivations was on vacation. Nobody had bothered to submit the ticket manually. It was sloppy, and it was exactly the kind of operational gap I'd usually catch and fix. But this time, I wasn't fixing anything. I started downloading. Not client data. I'm not a monster, but internal documents. Emails. Spreadsheets. Contracts. Financial records. I had my own external hard drive, and I spent 12 hours filling it up. And what I found was worse than I expected. The crimes, yes, actual crimes. Tax fraud. ISG had been classifying full-time employees as independent contractors to avoid paying payroll taxes and benefits. We're talking about 40 to 50 people who were working 40-plus hour weeks, some for years, who were misclassified. I found the internal emails where Derek and the CFO discussed this strategy explicitly, acknowledging it was legally questionable, but deciding the cost savings were worth the risk. Wage theft. Those same misclassified employees weren't being paid overtime. Some of our project managers were working 60 to 70-hour weeks and getting paid for 40 because they were classified as contractors. I found spreadsheets tracking their actual hours versus paid hours. Fraud on government contracts. This was the big one. ISG had several contracts with state and local government agencies. These contracts had strict requirements about who could work on them, usually U.S. citizens with background checks, specific certifications, that kind of thing. We'd been subcontracting work to overseas contractors and billing them at the rate for our certified U.S.-based staff. I found invoices, emails discussing how to hide this, the works, safety violations. We had field technicians who worked on telecom infrastructure. They were supposed to have specific safety equipment and training. The company had been skipping the training to save money and falsifying the certification documents. I found an email chain where Derek told the operations manager to just check the boxes on the safety forms. Embezzlement. This one I stumbled on by accident, but Derek had been approving fake vendor invoices and splitting the payments with our CFO. It was relatively small scale, maybe $150,000 over 2 years, but it was documented in emails where they weren't quite smart enough to speak in code. The execution. I spent Monday organizing everything. I created a comprehensive document outlining each violation, with supporting evidence hyperlinked and indexed. I was thorough, because this is what I do. I'm good at documentation. Then I started making calls. First stop, the Department of Labor. I filed a complaint about the misclassified workers and the wage theft. I submitted my evidence packet. Second, the IRS. I filled out Form 211, Application for Award for Original Information, as a whistleblower. The tax fraud was substantial enough that I might actually get a reward, but that wasn't why I was doing it. Third, the State Attorney General's office. The government contract fraud was a state matter. I sent them everything. Fourth, OSHA. Safety violations for the field techs. Fifth, the SEC. While gathering evidence, I'd found that the CFO had been inflating revenue numbers in reports to potential investors. ISG was trying to go public within the year. I also sent anonymous tips to 2 investigative reporters I knew from my college journalism days who now worked at the local business journal and a tech industry publication. And then I waited. The fallout. It took about 3 weeks for the first domino to fall. The Department of Labor showed up at ISG's office with a warrant to inspect employment records. I heard about it through former colleagues who were texting me. They hadn't been told why I was fired, just that I'd moved on. A week after that, the state AG's office opened an investigation into the government contracts. This one went public because it involved taxpayer money. The headlines were delicious. Local tech firm under investigation for defrauding state agencies. ISG's CEO held an emergency all-hands meeting where he threw Derek and the CFO under the bus, claiming he had no knowledge of any wrongdoing. But the evidence I'd provided included emails where the CEO was CC'd or directly involved. He had to have known. By week 6, the investigative reporters had published a comprehensive expose. They'd found additional victims, former employees who'd been misclassified and were owed back pay. The story included interviews with field techs who'd been injured because they didn't have proper training. It was damning. The investor funding ISG was counting on evaporated overnight. The government contract clients started terminating their agreements. Employees started jumping ship. Derek was fired in week 7. I know because he tried to call me, probably to threaten me, but I didn't answer. He left a voicemail that was just incoherent rage. I saved it just in case. The CFO was fired the same day. Last I heard, they're both facing criminal charges. By month 3, ISG was in full crisis mode. They'd lost 60% of their revenue and half their staff. They hired a crisis management firm and tried to rebrand, but the damage was done. The reckoning. Here's where it gets really good. Remember those misclassified employees I mentioned? Once the Department of Labor investigation became public, a labor attorney reached out to them about a class action lawsuit. They sued ISG for back pay, benefits, overtime, and penalties. The case settled last month for $4.2 million. The government contract fraud resulted in ISG being banned from bidding on any government contracts for 5 years and having to pay back $2.1 million in fraudulent billings plus penalties. The IRS penalties for the payroll tax fraud are still being calculated, but it's going to be substantial. And me? The IRS whistleblower program paid me 18% of what they recovered in taxes and penalties. I got a check for $347,000 2 months ago. But the best part came last week. ISG officially filed for bankruptcy. They're liquidating assets. The company that fired me for being with my dying mother is gone. The aftermath. I'm not going to pretend this was all easy. I spent a lot of nights wondering if I'd done the right thing. ISG employed 200 people, and most of them were good people just trying to do their jobs. A lot of them lost their jobs when the company went under. But here's what I keep coming back to. Those jobs were built on a foundation of fraud. Those field techs were being put in danger. Those contractors were being exploited. That wasn't my fault. That was Derek's and the CFO's and the CEO's. They built a house of cards, and I just knocked it down before it fell on its own and hurt more people. The misclassified employees got their back pay. The government isn't being defrauded anymore. The dangerous practices have stopped. And Derek? Derek is facing criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. His trial starts in a few months. I might have to testify, and I'm very much looking forward to it. I used some of my whistleblower money to create a scholarship in my mom's name at her alma mater. The rest is in savings while I figure out my next move. Several former ISG employees have reached out about starting a consulting firm that actually does things the right way. We'll see. My mom taught me to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I think she'd be proud of what I did. I hope she would be. Derek wanted to fire me for abandoning my responsibilities. But my responsibility was never to protect his criminal enterprise. It was to do the right thing. And in the end, that's exactly what I did. TLDR. Boss fired me while I was taking my mom off life support. Turned out I knew about years of corporate fraud, tax evasion, and safety violations. Reported everything to relevant authorities. Company is now bankrupt. Executives are facing criminal charges. Exploited workers got $4.2 million in back pay, and I got a $347,000 whistleblower reward. Don't fire the person who knows where all the bodies are buried. Edit 1. Wow, this blew up. A few people are asking about the legal aspects. Yes, I consulted with an attorney before submitting anything to make sure I was protected under whistleblower laws. I highly recommend anyone in a similar situation do the same. Edit 2. For those asking if I feel bad about the innocent employees who lost their jobs, I do. But they were going to lose them anyway. ISG was committing serious fraud, and it was going to catch up with them eventually. At least this way the workers who were being exploited got compensated, and nobody else got hurt in unsafe working conditions. Edit 3. Yes, my therapist knows about all of this. We've been working through it. Grief is complicated, and adding corporate revenge to the mix doesn't make it simpler. But I'm doing okay. Edit 4. To the person who asked if this is real because it seems too perfect, I've spent 6 years in operations building systems and documenting everything. When I decided to act, I did it the way I do everything, thoroughly. The fact that ISG's executives were stupid enough to document their crimes in writing isn't my fault. Edit 5. Several people have DM'd asking for advice about their own situations. I'm not a lawyer and can't give legal advice, but I can say this. If you know about corporate wrongdoing, document everything, talk to a lawyer, and understand the whistleblower protections in your jurisdiction before you act. And for the love of God, make sure your evidence is solid.